So good evening, dear beloved community. I hope everybody's doing well. Today it is the 6th of September in the year 2020, and it's such a delight to have the opportunity to be together with everyone. Here in Mountain Spring, we've been celebrating the rose ceremony yesterday and today. We had 2 days of rose ceremony so that our friends would be able to come up safely due to the COVID restrictions and be able to celebrate the gifts that our parents and our ancestors have offered to us and invited us to offer to the world. So it was a very beautiful coming together of practitioners of all ages, all coming to walk mindfully, to sit mindfully, and to share joyfully on this beautiful land. All around us, flowers are blooming and leaves are starting to bud. Spring is truly coming. It was such a wonderful thing to see a blossoming forth. Today, for example, we had a number of young children that were here as well. And we could hear the laughter of these young children echoing around the land here in Mountain Spring. And it brought me a lot of joy to hear that, because when the first abbot of Deer Park Monastery, where I was living for a long time, passed away, in the memorial gatha, the memorial poem that Tay, our teacher, wrote for Teyak Tan, he said that you will be remembered in the laughter of children that echoes among the mountains. And so today I really felt the presence of both our teacher and elders such as Teyak Tan today, and saw clearly these young ones who are here in the monastery and really enjoying the opportunity to just be together and to play and to enjoy the peaceful energy of the monastery. And I saw the continuation so clearly. It was a very beautiful moment. So I'm, in addition to being filled with joy to have the opportunity to sit together with the Sangha this evening, I'm also filled with the joy of the manifold community that was manifesting over these past few days here. So this evening, we're going to be exploring together some aspects of the second noble truth. The third recorded teaching offered by the Buddha, which was offered a few months after his awakening experience, it's called the Fire Discourse. He offered this teaching to about 1,000 fire worshippers near Gaya. And if you'd like to read it in its entirety, you can find it in the Samyutta Nikaya 35, number 28. So the sutra, the excerpt that I'll read this evening, says, at one time the Buddha was staying near Gaya, on the Gaya head, together with 1,000 mendicants. There the Buddha addressed the mendicants. Everything is burning. And what is the everything that's burning? The eye is burning. Sights are burning. Eye consciousness is burning. Eye contact is burning. The painful, the pleasant, or neutral feeling that arises conditioned by eye contact is also burning. What is it burning with? It's burning with the fires of greed, of ill will, and of delusion. It's burning with rebirth, with old age and death, with sorrow, lamentation, pain, sadness, and distress. And then the Buddha continues the same formulation for the ear, the nose, the tongue, and the body. And then says, the mind is burning, thoughts are burning, mind consciousness is burning, mind contact is burning. The painful, pleasant, or neutral feeling that arises conditioned by mind contact is also burning. Burning with what? Burning with the fires of greed, hate, and delusion, with rebirth, old age, and death, with sorrow, lamentation, pain, sadness, and distress, I say. Seeing this, the wise and noble disciple grows disillusioned with the eye, sights, eye consciousness, and eye contact. And they grow disillusioned with the painful, with the pleasant, or the neutral feeling that arises conditioned by eye contact, by ear, by nose, by tongue, by body, by mind, and the painful, pleasant, or neutral feeling that arises conditioned by mind contact. Being disillusioned in that way, desire fades away. When desire fades away, they're freed. When they're freed, they know they're freed. They understand this round of rebirth is ended. The spiritual journey has been completed for me. What had to be done has been done. There is no continuation of this endless round of samsara. That is what the Buddha said. Satisfied, the 1,000 mendicants were happy with what the Buddha shared. And while this discourse was being spoken, the minds of the 1,000 monks were freed. So in this pithy and powerful discourse, we see one of the main thrusts of the Buddha's teaching, which we'll be exploring this evening. There are so many layers to this teaching, but before we delve into just a couple of them this evening, I want to mention that it's always a moving experience for me to read this discourse, because not only is it a powerful infusion, a powerful transmission, but it also shows us the Buddha's incredible skillfulness as a teacher. He was able to understand to whom he was speaking, in which situation his listeners were, and to be able to use experiences that they were familiar with to be able to present the Dharma. If we're lucky enough to meet such a teacher who's able to meet us where we're at, we're indeed lucky. And the Buddha didn't only meet these mendicants, the fire worshippers, where they were at. He used their own experience, their frame of reference, to call them forth. This is the mark of a great teacher. In this discourse, we hear a lot about the world. The world here is, of course, the world outside, but also the world inside. We hear about the world being on fire with this pervasive sense of lack, which is one of the fundamental aspects that gives rise to this feedback loop that we give the convenient name craving. The second noble truth, which is the realization of the origin or the cause of suffering, both our individual suffering and suffering in general, is the realization on a fundamental level that every single thing has a cause. From the very smallest thing, the very smallest question, to the greatest question of all, suffering, or this round of birth and death. Every single thing that we experience in our lives doesn't arise out of nowhere, but arises due to various causes and conditions. When we speak of dukkha, or suffering, or unsatisfactoriness, then the Buddha shares with us in this discourse and throughout his teaching career that the cause, the fundamental cause or root is tanha, or craving. Tanha can be translated in many different ways. It's usually translated as craving. It can also be translated as thirst. The truth itself is shared in a very pithy way, a very concise way, but it is incredibly deep and profound, incredibly vast. To use the lens of the second noble truth, one approach could be to ask ourselves, what is my suffering? And what form of thirst or craving arriving from what sense of lack in me has caused this dis-ease, this lack of ease to arise? As Buddhist practitioners, we want to be very specific rather than just suffering or happiness as a generalization. What is my suffering? How does suffering manifest in my experience? What is my happiness? How does happiness manifest in my experience? rather than craving or thirst as a generalization. What is craving exactly? How does it manifest in me? Only then does our practice become something personal, become something real, and become something powerful, and not a generalization. The Buddha himself explained thirst or craving in the following way. He said, "Now this, friends, is the noble truth of the origin of suffering. It is this craving," again, tanha or thirst, "which leads to re-becoming. That is, craving for sensual pleasures, craving for becoming, and craving for non-existence." The second noble truth, which is called the truth of samudaya in Pali, it's called the dukkha samudaya, or the arising of dukkha, the arising of unsatisfactoriness or suffering, is the truth that dukkha, unsatisfactoriness, both arises from and continues with tanha, with craving, with thirst, which is the continual running after and clinging to things that are impermanent, things that are always changing, whether they're physical objects, whether they're people, or whether they're ideas or mind states or emotions. Things that we think will give us security, but they don't really. This comes about because on a very deep level, we have this mistaken view that we're always lacking something. There's always something more just over the horizon. This is the conditioned nature of our mind. This clinging and this craving leads to this sense of this continual cycle, this cycle of renewed becoming. And we end up getting trapped in these cycles, whether they're small cycles or large cycles of what I like to call a recycled dissatisfaction. We get what we want and what we think we need, and we're satisfied for just a moment. And then after a short time, we're right back where we started again. A number of years ago, we had the first young adult retreat in Deer Park Monastery. I was thinking about this retreat today because we had also a number of Wake Up friends from ages 18 to 35 who were here at Mountain Spring. And I was thinking back to this first young adult retreat we held in Deer Park. It was a very innovative retreat, and the title of the retreat was Speed, which is kind of interesting. It's kind of ironic if you come to a Plum Village practice center, because we like to slow everything down, but it was called Speed. It was in about 2004. I think. During that retreat, on one of the days, towards the end of the retreat, we actually divided the young retreatants up into different groups. Each group had a monastic in it. And we went down to the town nearby, and we all had different tasks to do. Some of us, we had the task of going to the post office, which is one of those delightful jobs. And we were standing at that time in 2004, roundabout then, there was always a very long and slow line in the post office. So one group had the job of going to the post office and standing in line to mail the different letters and packages that we had to mail from Deer Park Monastery at that time, and then to notice all of the different feelings that came up. To notice if they experienced a sense of frustration or anger or confusion, or to notice also how they were standing, or whether everybody was looking at each other while they were in line or ignoring each other, and so on. There was another group that went to the petrol station, to the gas station, to fill up the monastery cars and to do everything in mindfulness, but then to also, when they went to the gas station, their practice was to go and look around at the snacks in the gas station and see how many healthful snacks were in the gas station, and what was possible to have there. By the way, we were not just having everyone go down to town to do all the errands for the monastery, or that was not the purpose, but we wanted to help people to be able to have some concrete practices to do while they were actually engaged in tasks that people were often doing in their daily lives. So with everything we did, we had a contemplation, even sitting in the car, how to slowly and attentively put on our seatbelt and so on. It was a great retreat. And then one other group, they were in the supermarket, and they had a number of practices to do. And one of the practices was when they saw something that they desperately wanted in the supermarket, then they were to pick it up and to walk around as if it was theirs, and to walk around and notice if they're feeling of delight, that feeling of finally it's mine or something, diminished over time. And if they noticed that it diminished as they carried it around for a while, to put it down and just leave it there. Not a single person that was on that retreat actually bought their object. After carrying it around for a period of time, they just left it there, and they ended up coming and joining everybody in the park. And it was a very interesting experiment. In terms of the second noble truth, craving here, the word craving, or as we're translating tanha, is quite specific. And it includes three aspects. It includes kama tanha, which is the craving for sense pleasures, as we heard a moment ago, the thirst for the pleasures of the senses, a pleasant sight, a sound, a taste, a touch, and so on. Bhava tanha, which is a thirst, a wish, a desire, a craving to continue this cycle of coming to be, birth, or dissolution, death, that we spoke about last week. This craving to become something. And then vibhava tanha, which is craving to not experience the world and painful feelings, or craving to get rid of something. And we'll go a little bit more deeply into that later. So basically, the second noble truth shares with us that there is an origin to all forms of suffering, and that the origin of suffering is clinging to and identifying with some form of these three strands, these three kinds of tanha, or desire or craving. Desire for sense pleasure, desire to become something, or desire to get rid of. This is the insight and the practice of the second noble truth. Why don't we enjoy a sound of the bell? While the term we heard earlier, dukkha samudaya, in terms of the Four Noble Truths, is traditionally translated and explained as the arising of suffering, or sometimes the cause of suffering. The Pali word samudaya actually has a broader sense of co-arising together. Nothing can exist by itself alone. And in an almost counterintuitive way, together with dukkha, with unsatisfactoriness, comes tanha, comes thirst. It's almost as if, even though we know at some level it's ultimately unsatisfactory, we still have this thirst that goes together with it. craving or thirst comes into existence together with dukkha, with unsatisfactoriness. Actually, when you think about it, the insight here is that we're quite mad, where it's almost as if we're like a moth or a butterfly that's attracted to a candle flame, and we're about to fly through it. Not knowing that flying through that flame, which is calling out to every fiber of our being, is actually going to end our life as a moth or a butterfly. And the Buddha here is like a wise elder butterfly or a moth saying, don't do it. Don't do it. Everything that we think will give us happiness and relief, in fact, are not. And are not giving us true happiness and relief, to use the lens of the second noble truth, this deep insight, this heart teaching from the Buddha. In fact, using the lens of the second noble truth, we're constantly engaged in samudaya, creating suffering through this thirst, this craving, and our desires for things to be other than the way that they are. Sometimes these cravings or these thirsts are deep and burning, but most often they're subtle or even almost imperceptible, little wishes that we carry all day long. I wish it were warmer, or I wish it were cooler outside. Those of us in the southern hemisphere are definitely, wishing perhaps it was a little warmer. Those of us in the northern hemispheres are experiencing heat waves, especially in the United States, in California at the moment. So they're wishing that it was a bit cooler. I wish COVID was over. I wish I had more sugar in my coffee. I wish the lines weren't so long at the store. I wish Phap Hai would stop talking about suffering. Could be another wish. Understanding this tendency of samudaya, of these little wishes, it's not passivity or fatalism. In fact, if we understand the lens of the Four Noble Truths, and in particular the second Noble Truth deeply, we understand that in fact, rather than being an invitation to passivity and just this sense of like, it is what it is, there's nothing I can do. In fact, it's a radical call to engagement. The Four Noble Truths are deeply empowering and come from the foundational realization that it's possible for us, for each of us, to be able to transform our situation, to be able to transform our suffering. And yet, let's be honest, it's often feels as if it's a near constant battle going on within each one of us. But we can begin to understand these aspects of desire, and by understanding them, by shining a light on them, we can reduce the power, the sway that they have over us. It might be good to begin with understanding that things are not very often in this world of red dust, in this world of samsara, going to conform completely to our desire for them to be a particular way. And that developing the capacity to be okay with that is one of the most powerful and transformative things. We spoke last week about the 3 turnings of the wheel with regard to each of the Four Noble Truths. The second Noble Truth, with its 3 turnings of the wheel, are of course recognition, encouragement, and realization or accomplishment. And on the recognition level, there's the understanding that within ourselves deeply, we understand that whatever suffering we're experiencing, whether a personal suffering or suffering with a capital S, just the suffering, that deep unsatisfactoriness that we experience, that it has an origin. There has been an ignoble path that we or I or us, that we've been engaged in, which has brought about this situation individually or collectively. And it's come out of, in some way, our identification with and our attachment to a certain strand of this thirst, this desire. And the encouragement turning of the wheel is that I can and I need to understand this pattern in my life, this repeating pattern. And the realization or accomplishment turning of the wheel is that I've come to an understanding of this pattern in me, and I'm able to let go of it. I'd like to go a little more into what I shared earlier about the three kinds of desire, the three strands of craving. Because when we hear this second noble truth, often we hear that suffering has a cause, or we hear that the cause of suffering is craving. And for many of us, we stop right there. And for me, I'm hoping that these few words about the three different aspects of craving or tanha might be helpful and might help us to be able to apply the insight of the second noble truth into our daily life. Desire or tanha in Pali is an important thing to understand, and especially to understand the three forms of desire, the three forms of thirst that are listed as the root causes of dukkha or unsatisfactoriness. So the first is kama tanha, which is the thirst or the hunger for sense pleasures. And this strand, this aspect is quite easy to understand. This is the constant search for happiness or even any kind of relief through sense pleasures. And when we were going through our series on the 4 kinds of nutriments, we explored sense impressions and the food of sensory input in some detail. So basically a pleasant sound, a pleasant sensation, a pleasant taste, a pleasant touch, and so on. So it might be a helpful reflection to consider for ourselves, what is it like when we ourselves experience this thirst for pleasure through our senses? For example, when we're eating, if we're hungry and the food tastes delicious, we can be aware of wanting to take another bite, even though we already have food in our mouth. And sometimes I do this when I'm offering a practice for eating meditation. I invite our friends to notice if they already have a mouthful of food but are preparing the next one. And then we can notice perhaps how it feels when we're already tasting something pleasant and we want more of it. We notice how that feels. That when we have something pleasant, there's a desire for more. Sometimes we can also notice something quite interesting as well. There, with edible foods, there might be a desire for this pleasant taste and to have another taste of it. But if we stay with that sensation, and more particularly with the observation of that sensation, at a certain moment, we experience this, that's enough. Maybe we're eating a piece of cake, and the first mouthful, it ignites all of these sensations. It ignites the reward centers of our brain, and we want another mouthful and another mouthful. But maybe the 4th or the 5th mouthful is not quite as pleasant as the original one. And at a certain point, for most of us, we just feel like, you know what, that's enough. And then we really don't want another mouthful of cake. So try it out, experience it, see how this thread of tanha, of thirst, of craving arises. The craving for sense pleasures is always a little bit more. It could be a pleasant sight. It could be a sound. It could be a sensation of the body or a smell. The second aspect of tanha, of craving, is bhava tanha, the thirst to become. So in the second area of reflection, We contemplate the feeling of wanting to become something, anything really, other than what we are right now. We, in this way, even on a subtle level, it could almost be analogous to being caught in a realm of ambition and attainment, the desire to become something. We can even see it in our spiritual practice. I want to practice meditation so that I can become free from pain. Or I want to become enlightened. Or I want to become a monk and nun. If only I could become a monk or a nun, then I would be completely happy. I want to have a partner or a children or a profession. And so on and so on. There's an and an and. So looking at this strand of desire, this wanting to become something, I'd like to ask you to contemplate something that we've discussed about before when we looked and we explored right intentionality. And also when we looked at volition in the 4 kinds of nutriments. It's a question for contemplation. I'd like to ask you to consider for yourself, what's the difference between bhavatana, this thirst to become something, and aspiration or intentionality? On the other extreme from the thirst to become something, there's also a third strand of craving or thirst or tanha, that is the desire to get rid of things, to get rid of something. This is called vibhava tanha. So it can be helpful as well to contemplate how this strand arises, how it manifests in us, in our consciousness, the desire to get rid of something. And this is another one, it's kind of the shadow side of spirituality. And I would actually say it is, if we notice that we have a strong tendency towards this, I would watch out, because a lot of times when we see spiritual bypassing, we also see this tendency, this vibhava tanha strand to be quite strong. I want to get rid of my suffering. I want to get rid of my anger. I've got this anger and I want to get rid of it. If only I could get rid of jealousy, fear, and anxiety, everything would be perfect. If only I could get rid of that annoying person, or that annoying group of people, or that difficult situation in the Sangha, whatever, then everything would be perfect. So, you know what? If we really have the insight into the nature of our world, the nature of samsara, the insight of the first noble truth, the insight that we discussed and we looked into last week, we'll know that, you know what, it's probably not going to be so perfect. I should probably say this right now. Please don't be tempted to make the mistake at this point of trying to get rid of vibhava tanha. We don't want to create another war, another struggle inside against this tendency, but we also don't want to feed it. We don't want to buy into it too much. Instead, by identifying this strand of craving, of thirst, the reflection that we hold is more an awareness of, you know, when I notice that I want to get rid of something, whatever it might be, whether it's a painful feeling, whether it's a difficult emotion, or whether it's a difficult person, group of people, or situation, then this is what it feels like. You might notice, or you might have picked up that, in fact, the strand of craving or thirst in the form of becoming something, and craving in the form of getting rid of, are very much connected. They're very much interrelated. So please bear in mind that these 3 categories of craving, craving for sense pleasures, craving to become, and craving to get rid of something are just convenient ways of contemplating this thirst that we have, this basic craving, this desire that we have. They're actually conventional designations, really. They're not totally separate forms of desire, but they're different aspects of it. Recognizing the different ways that desire manifests in us is the first turning of the wheel with regard to the second noble truth. Let's have a sound of the bell. So when we consider the second turning of the wheel with regard to this noble truth, the encouragement, then in this turning of the wheel, we have the understanding that it's time to let go of this desire, whichever specific form of desire is manifesting in us, then this encouragement of knowing that it's time to let it go. This is how the practice of letting go manifests in our practice. At some point, we have an insight that a pattern of desire, of being pulled this way and that way, is no longer serving, and that it's time to let go of it. But that insight is not the same as a desire to let go of anything. If we haven't really developed a firm foundation of mindfulness and clear view, we tend to fall into the pattern of, I want to get rid of something, or I want to let go, or I have to let go of all of my desires. But actually, this is just another desire. By recognizing and understanding these three kinds of desire, it becomes much easier to let them go in a real way. The second noble truth is not about developing the habit of over-identifying with desires. It's about recognizing desires that manifest and how it has specifically manifested in your situation to contribute to your individual suffering. In fact, the practice of Buddhism, the practice of the Dharma, is not about beating ourselves up for having desire, but understanding that desire is conditioned into our mind, and that desires, by their nature, are impermanent. In fact, everything's impermanent. Everything's always in a state of change. Desire is not the ultimate state of our being, the ultimate nature of our being, but the way we tend to react out of ignorance, of not seeing clearly, when we haven't understood these Four Noble Truths in their three aspects, the three different turnings of the wheel, right in the heart of our lives. Face it, everybody, like we tend to react like this to everything. And in fact, in some way, it's actually what we experience as normal. In Chinese medicine, there's a thought that if you have a chronic illness, at a certain point, our body begins to think that that chronic illness is normal. And the body has to relearn again what's normal, and it can struggle to relearn what's normal. And this is actually quite a good analogy of the view of Buddhism. What we think is normal is actually a mistaken and in many ways maladaptive behavior. But we're not just hopeless victims of tanha, of thirst, of craving, desire, or mindless desire only has control as long as we grasp it, if we believe in it, and we react to it unmindfully. Usually we equate suffering, dukkha, with a feeling, like a feeling of suffering. But feeling itself is not suffering. It's the grasping of desire. Desire in one of the three forms, the three main forms that manifest suffering in the view of Buddhism or the view of the Buddha. Let me give you a heads up. It might be a good idea to write this down in your consciousness. This is a real pointing out instruction. If there's nothing else to remember from this talk, this wall of words, then just remember this. Desire does not cause suffering. The cause of suffering is the grasping of an identification with desire. This is an important reflection for each one of us. It's our identification with, our desperate grasping onto our desire that brings suffering. As practitioners, we engage our mindfulness and our curiosity, our Dhammavichaya, our investigation, and we investigate desire as it arises, the different forms of desire, the different strands of desire as they arise, and we begin to know it for what it is. If we have some insight into the second noble truth ourselves, and we recognize the origin of a form of suffering, seeing how it came to be, then we realize that the problem is the grasping onto, the identification with one of the forms of desire. If we're grasping, then it's likely that we're not seeing so clearly. We don't have such a clear view of some aspect. We're selfing. We're creating an I, me, or mine around something. These desires are me, and there's something wrong with me for having them. Or I don't like the way I am now. I have to become something else. Or I have to get rid of something or someone before I can become what I want to be. All of this is desire in different forms. So as practitioners, we want to be able to listen to it, to smile to it, and maybe for advanced practitioners, to be able to laugh with it, with bare attention. Not saying it's good, not saying it's bad, but merely recognizing it for what it is and calling it by its true name. Reflecting on desires as they arise, contemplating desire as it arises in its different forms, and listening to the different desires is quite different from attaching to them. We're just allowing them to be the way that they are. We're not struggling. We're not trying to throw away. We're just allowing them to be how they are. Smiling to them, waving hello, and moving on. We see clearly through the insight of the second noble truth, we see clearly that we've been down this road many, many times. We've walked this particular track in the carpet many, many times. And that there's no reason to think that this time is going to be any different than the times before. That there will be a different outcome or something by following the same pathway again. So as an intelligent person, we have a realization that there's a different choice that's possible. There's a different response that's possible. On the flip side, a young novice once told me, you know, Thầy, I've been having a difficulty lately and I was feeling quite discouraged about it. But then I was reflecting on it and I realized that up to now, I've had about 100% success rate in overcoming all serious difficulties. I mean, I'm here. So there's no reason to think that this time will be any different. So on a deep level, we can have an aha moment when we come to the realization that the origin of suffering, desire, or the three forms of desire, can be laid aside and let go of. I think we use the term letting go a little too much in Buddhism without reflecting on what it means and how to actually do it. So how to practice letting go? It doesn't mean to just destroy things or to throw them away or to get rid of them. That's really not what we're talking about here. In fact, letting go as a spiritual practice means to leave things as they are. It's more like being able to put something down and let it be there. One of our deep-seated tendencies is to think that getting rid of something is a way of getting rid of attachment, of identification. The object of desire here is not the actual problem. That would be too easy. The problem is grasping and identifying with the object. So what do? We let it go. We lay it aside. We put it down gently without holding on to a sense of ill will or aversion, a sense of like it's not okay. Just putting it down gently and lovingly and moving on. We can apply this insight into letting go, into the awareness of each of the moments of our daily life. Sense pleasures, becoming, getting rid of something. Recognizing these tendencies when they arise is already a moment of waking up. So I would say give it a go. We say all the time, this shouldn't be like this. I shouldn't be this way, and you shouldn't be like this, and you shouldn't do that, and so on. In fact, I'm sure I could tell you what you should be, and I'm pretty certain that you could tell me what I should be. We're quite expert in that. That's something that we all have a doctorate in. Our suffering often comes from the attachment that we have to ideas and to the complexes we create about the way things are. The more that we contemplate and investigate this grasping in our life, the more an insight arises. It's almost like, well, Fabhai, this was a waste of time. This desire should be understood and let go of. Then through the actual practice and the understanding of what letting go really is, we have the third insight into the second noble truth, which is this particular form of desire has been identified and has been able to be put down. It's been let go of. And we actually experience letting go, leaving behind, and moving on. This is not a theoretical letting go, not a struggle, but a direct insight. It's something that is very easy if we have that insight. We know that for ourselves that letting go has been accomplished. We feel freer, and freedom is actually what practice of Buddhism is all about. This journey of freedom is not only a one-time thing. This is not only a one-time insight, but the insight of the second noble truth, and in fact, all of the noble truths are insights that we keep rediscovering over and over again. We go to deeper layers with each issue over and over again in our lives. This week, dear friends, dear community, I'd like to invite everybody to, as we go through this week, to see if you can notice one of those three forms of desire when it arises. The desire when we get pulled into sense pleasures and how that feels, how that manifests. When we notice a desire a thirst to become something other than what we are right now, and how that manifests, how we interact with that, and under what circumstances does it arise. And then the desire to get rid of something. How and in which situations does that manifest? And then also, since last week, we were practicing to identify a situation of suffering, of dis-ease, of ill-being in our lives. So we can bring that situation to mind and then use the lens of the second noble truth to know that that situation has an origin, and to explore using this lens of the three strands of desire, of craving, and see if any of them resonate and see what discoveries that we have. I wish everyone a wonderful week.